Welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Purendra Prasad. I teach sociology in the Department of Sociology at University of Hyderabad. This module that I am going to introduce you today is on clinical trials in India, ethical issues. This is part of the Sociology of Health paper. To start with, clinical trials in India is an important kind of a theme, primarily because third world countries today are the prime destination for clinical trials. Why are sociologists interested in this kind of a technical kind of a clinical trials? Clinical trials actually, first we need to understand the objectives of this module is to introduce what clinical trials in India are about, to analyze the ethical issues that are related to clinical trials, and how the marginal vulnerable population in third world countries have been exploited, and a lot of data is actually outsourced to India. So these are the major objectives in which this module will be dealt with. To start with, what is clinical trials? Clinical trials are scientific studies primarily dealing with the new drugs, vaccines, medical instruments, equipments, therapies, which are being tested on the subjects. Here, subjects meaning either healthy volunteers or patients, to see whether there is safety of this drug that is developed in the field. So clinical trial actually is a set of procedure or a practice that certifies a new drug molecule as safe and efficacious. So clinical trials are basically conducted for the drug development, and only with the new drugs and its development we are able to handle the new diseases that are widespread across the world. So if that is the case, how is this process actually taking place? Clinical trials actually involves a large number of stages, and it involves billion-dollar kind of a investment. It takes a very long period of time to do research before any drug actually comes into the market. So to tell you about clinical trial stages, there are about 6 stages. First two stages are preclinical trial stages, which are done on animals. So the stage 1 is called preclinical trial stage. Here the 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 kind of therapeutic effect actually is tested on the animals. The extent of toxicity and the bearability of this toxicity on the animals actually is tested in the preclinical trial stage. While the next stage is about the drug dosage. What is the appropriate dosage in which there can be a maximum efficiency that can be achieved if one actually introduces this drug into the animal bodies. So while preclinical trial is about the toxicity levels, the second preclinical trial, which is also called as phase 0. So stage 0, which is testing the appropriateness of the drug on the animals. And here again, I think only when this is tested as safe, clinical trials will go further. Otherwise, clinical trials cannot go any longer. So, having passed through these two phases of preclinical trial and the phase 0, then the next stages are on the human beings. So, phase 1 trials are actually on the human beings. Primarily, it is tested on the healthy volunteers. Phase 1 trials are actually on the healthy volunteers, except in case of HIV/AIDS and oncology, where the terminal cases actually are recruited. Otherwise, it is generally only for the healthy volunteers. What do they do in these phase 1 trials? There are two processes, they call it as pharmacodynamics and pharmacokinetics. Pharmacodynamic is nothing but the impact of drug on the body. Pharmacokinetic is how body is able to absorb the drug and put it out. So the pharmacokinetic actually is very important because the integration of how drug actually works in the body and how body absorbs into it is what gives you certain kind of a biological processes that helps the drug development. So the phase 1 trials are a very, very intense. It is done on healthy human population. It is done for the ultimate benefit of the humanity and humankind. And to tell you about the Indian case, phase 1 trials are not permitted by the multinational companies in India. It's only the national companies which can do phase 1 trials. So once it is tested actually as safe and efficacious, then the phase 2 trials actually can be carried out. In this phase 2 trial, there will be the dosage of the drug and the toxicity of the drug will be tested on a select group, say 150 to 300 people. And if that actually is permissible and the human responses are safe enough, then it moves on to the phase 3 trials. Phase 3 actually is a randomized kind of a trials done on thousands of people. So phase 3 trials are conducted at multi-sited kind of centers, meaning that trials are done in Kenya, India, Brazil, Japan. So it is a multi-sited kind of a recruitment. Hundreds and thousands of people actually are recruited into a single kind of a drug testing. And once that is passed through in terms of efficacy and safety, there is the last stage, which is also called as pharmacovigilance kind of a phase, meaning that phase 4, once the drug molecule is actually released into the market, then they see for next 1.5 year whether there are any complaints by the consumers or patients who purchase this medicine. So that's called as post-marketing strategy for the drug companies to ensure that their own kind of a drug actually does not have any side effects or any kind of a undesirable kind of consequences because of the drug release. So this is how the different stages of stages where clinical trials actually take place. And when you look at it, there are actually different actors. Who are the different actors in the drug development and clinical trials? One, it is the large pharmaceutical companies. Second, biotechnology companies. Third, public sector R&D institutions and universities. Then you also have Indian Council of Medical Research, NIN kind of institutions, National Institute of Nutrition kind of institutions, who are all involved in the drug development. So how do these actors actually perform. To a large extent, the initial phase of the research actually is done in the public universities and public laboratories in terms of the idea of a drug molecule. Once the drug molecule is actually discovered, it is increasingly outsourced to different pharma companies and biotech companies who get involved in terms of developing that and testing out on both animal population and the human population. So when you look at the sponsors actually, when you see in terms of the pharma companies, the pharmaceutical companies, because they are investing a large kind of capital into it, they would want the returns also to be, very, very secure. And therefore, most of the research actually agendas are decided according to the demand that is generated in different parts of the world. So, one of the major issues that is actually raised in clinical trial is that the lifestyle diseases and diseases in the Western world constitute the research agenda making, while it is tested on the population in the third world countries, and therefore, third world country population is becoming more like guinea pigs. A lot of this testing actually is being done here. And when you look at how do these pharma companies actually operationalize clinical trial research in different countries, they actually appoint what is called as CROs, contract research organizations, who are like intermediaries or managerial kind of cadre who actually mediate between the pharma companies and that of the hospitals and the medical professionals to actually recruit the population at different levels. So CROs play a very crucial role, and if you look at the growth of CROs in India, till 1990s there were less than 300. Today it is more than 7,000 CROs actually have been set up, indicating how much of the clinical trial research actually is going on today in the Indian context. So when you look at these different actors, there is a important role for regulatory agency. In India, there is one of the largest regulatory agency is the government DCGI, that is Drug Controller General of India, is one of the important regulatory kind of an authority. Apart from, say, for instance, in US you have Food and Drug kind of administration, and in UK you have different kind of regulatory agencies. So these regulatory agencies scrutinize thoroughly for the safety and the efficacy of these drugs before they are approved and released into the market for consumption. So when you look at these regulatory agencies, uh, the problems that are encountered in third world countries is that they have very, very skeletal kind of a staff. They do not have adequate manpower. They do not have adequate kind of a technical kind of a competence, and the bureaucracy, which is actually very weak kind of a structure in India, and therefore there are number of problems that these regulatory agencies are encountering in approving the drugs. So today multinational companies think that it's easier to actually outsource any of the drug development to third world countries because it is cheaper, it can get actually passed very quickly. So these are some of the concerns which are leading to the ethical and other kind of human rights concerns in the third world context. So when you look at procedure of these clinical trials in India, so before any of the sponsoring agency whether it is pharma companies or biotech companies, before they sponsor or propose any kind of a research trial, they will have to actually identify a CRO. CRO in turn identifies principal investigator or a doctor in a hospital setting who is involved in a particular kind of a area, and these doctors actually will have to recruit the volunteers. In medical language they call it as subjects. So when they actually recruit these subjects, they will have to take the informed consent from the patients. Me saying that we agree to all the terms and conditions and voluntarily participate in the clinical trial research, and this is not for therapeutic effect alone. This we are participating for in the interest of the society and for the scientific advancement. This is the kind of a consent that they are supposed to give. Now, the problems in the Indian context are at different levels. Okay, so if you talk about the principal investigators or the doctors, a lot of doctors in the government hospitals are identified, and these government hospitals actually have hundreds of patients, so they do not have adequate time to look after their own patients. In addition to it, they are involved in clinical trial research. Of course, there are a lot of incentives that the pharma companies provide to these medical professionals, and therefore they participate in the clinical trials. And hence, you have a lot of unethical kind of practices that creep in into the clinical trial research. And in terms of informed consent form, the entire protocol, the clinical trial protocol, is supposed to be administered to the patients in their local language. Okay, so it has to be translated in Marathi, in Telugu, or in different languages. It has to be explained to the subjects properly, and then these patients are supposed to be recruited. But given the Indian context, the way a large number of patients in India consider doctors as either as lifesavers or demigods. So whatever a doctor actually tells them, they simply agree to it, thinking that it will have some therapeutic effect and doctor is the best decision maker. So in that sense, the entire process actually is taken for granted, and the healthy volunteers and the patients are recruited without much of the persuasion. So this is where the ethical concerns are actually coming in. And when you look at, I think the hospital setting where clinical trials are actually conducted, you find that in the Indian context, there are a lot of diseases. People actually are dying of malaria, tuberculosis, respiratory illnesses. But the clinical trial research agendas are largely in terms of lifestyle diseases, either it is diabetes or in terms of cancer and other kind of lifestyle diseases. That's one of the mismatch. Second thing is that the international kind of a conventions and also Schedule Y of the Drug and Cosmetic Act in India also says that if disadvantaged and vulnerable population is recruited into clinical trials, there should be at least the health benefits actually accrue to them. Meaning that suppose they conduct a kind of a drug trial in India in 6 centers in Bangalore, Hyderabad, Bhopal, Delhi, and other places. In all these 6 centers, when they conduct trial on different population, they are supposed to actually, once the drug is developed and released into the market, the drug that is developed based on this human population, the communities need to given the benefit, saying that at least one third of the cost actually should be reduced. So that's not happening. So this is another concern that is actually raised. So in a way, when you look at the entire clinical trial research process, the patients actually are recruited without their consent. In a sense, there is a lot of coercion that takes place at different levels. There is also a kind of research agenda that is imposed from the developed countries, which is not catering to the needs of the population here. Even after the drug development, it is not actually benefiting the local communities. And when you look at the kind of incentives that these healthy volunteers are paid, they are actually paid, per day wage, like 3 to 400 rupees, and they are actually kept in a kind of a clinical contract research organization for about 15 days, segregating them, isolating them from their families and the communities. So, having stayed away from their families and communities, they are merely paid a kind of a wage, while in the Western context, clinical trial research actually is very expensive. So, in that sense, one of the important questions that this module raises is that why is India becoming a clinical trial destination in the last 2 decades? One of the important reason is also the treatment naive population that's available. There is a lot of population who are not actually, the drug induced. So there is that diversity in terms of caste, class, ethnicity, gender. There is also treatment naive population that's available. There is, it's very cheap for the patients to be recruited in the Indian context. The amount of time it actually consumes to recruit a patient actually is fairly simple. The regulatory mechanism is very weak, therefore, you get all the approvals fairly quickly. So, India is becoming the destination for the clinical trials in the Indian context. So when you move on in terms of what have been the implications of this clinical trial research in the last few years, I think there are a lot of studies that have actually indicated that, for instance, Gulati and Nandi, who studied in the Indian context, they said that a lot of people actually become here guinea pigs. They do not even know that they're participating in a trial research. Okay. Similarly, if you look at the recent controversy both in Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat, there were a large number of tribal girls actually who were recruited into this study, and a particular kind of a vaccine was actually given to them, and there were serious kind of adverse consequences on these populations. And when you look at who gave the consent for these girls, they all stay in a welfare hostel. The teachers and the hostel wardens actually gave consent on behalf of the students, which introduces a lot of unethical kind of a practices. Similarly, when you actually look at how in a hospital setting the informed consent form sessions are actually conducted, they simply tell them that these are all the procedures and they read out the text. They would not even give an opportunity for these patients to actually discuss with their own family members and other people. They are given very little time to actually respond, which introduces lot of unethical kind of a practices into the trial research. So, in a sense, what is happening is that while the pharma companies actually outsource these clinical trials simply because it is cost efficient and there is diverse population recruited at a very fast pace, but the problem in the Indian context is that a lot of vulnerable population actually is becoming the kind of target for these clinical trial research. So one needs to understand the benefits and the disastrous consequences. While one agrees that without drug development and without kind of a new research, scientific research, we will not be able to actually address the diseases, new diseases. So there is actually pros and cons in terms of developing a drug and also taking the patient's safety and their kind of concerns into account. So, is there no way to actually, balance these both things? Can scientific research not be conducted in a safe environment where the population in third world countries be protected and research conducted? It is possible. If you look at the Western context, the institutional ethics committees are very strong. They have one scientific kind of a personnel, one medical doctor, you have one legal kind of a person sitting in the ethics committee, you have one lay person, and you have one social scientist, and other journalist or a kind of a key person who actually play a very crucial role before they approve any of the regulatory mechanisms. Okay. While in India also, in form there is that ethical kind of a committees, but the way these committees actually are operated, there are a lot of problems. So we are not saying that all clinical trials in India are actually, are problematic, but there is a large scale kind of unethical practices given the fact that you have district hospitals and state kind of a tertiary hospitals where thousands of people actually flock these hospitals for treatment, and a large number of people do not even know whether they are participating in a study or they are only changing from one drug to another drug. Okay, so these are some of the concerns that civil society will have to play a very efficient role, and some of the kind of civil society organizations needs to be vigilant about the clinical trial registry that is actually put on the web pages, where displaying what the clinical trial is about, what all centers these drugs are tested, what are the side effects that these drugs are going to have. All these, I think, are there on the web pages. But given our 60 to 70 percentage of the illiterate population, we need to be vigilant about these practices. And therefore, sociology comes in here in terms of, understanding different actors, their roles, and how scientific research can be conducted in a more conducive environment where the vulnerable population and disadvantaged population do not actually feel that they are taken for granted in each of the contexts. So this is where I think sociologists play a very significant kind of a role in in trying to mediate between different kind of actors in the current globalized world. Given the globalization and the increase in the drug development process, because it actually you know provides a huge kind of profits to the pharma companies. So today I think the academics the public intellectuals, the media, and a whole range of civil society organizations also need to come together in terms of actually, providing a platform for all the patients and the healthy volunteers to share their concerns and participate in a drug development in a more stringent and safer kind of a manner. I hope you have understood this module. There are a lot of details which are given in the e-text, and for additional kind of help you can also refer web links and the self-assessment and other assignments that are provided. These things would actually clarify the module adequately. Thank you.